So my name is Susan Hamilton. I graduated with my AA last spring, first one from Peninsula College. I'm Alaska Haida. I grew up in Seattle. My father was from Alaska, but he was from the boarding school. So it's been a treat for me to be exploring what goes on with Alaska Natives and what issues they face. And one of the big ones that I found this quarter was subsistence rights for Alaska Natives, which there are none. And so here, my abstract is this case examines subsistence and what it means to the Alaska Native people. Subsistence to Alaska Natives is more complex than the Western definition. The Alaska wilderness is embroiled in a debate over protecting Alaska Natives' subsistence rights or protecting the industries that lend support to the state's economy. And I have a quote here that I really like. It was from a senator from Hawaii. And sadly, I know that too many of our colleagues only have passing familiarity with what we mean by subsistence. Subsistence is a word that many people use without really knowing what it means to the Native people of this land. Most Americans think that subsistence means basic survival. If you aren't familiar with the ways of Native people, you might not know that subsistence is more than just simple sustenance. It is a way of life. The gathering and harvesting of natural resources by the natural Native people of this nation has been going on for thousands of years. Subsistence is so much a part of the fabric of our Native existence that without it there would be no culture, no tradition, and perhaps no community, and certainly no means of giving expression to the spiritual aspects of Native life. So, in Alaska, I know my own relatives, they practice subsistence, and we're from Southeast Alaska. And food in Alaska, I mean, everything for the most part has to be shipped in except for what is indigenous to the area. And it gets really expensive. And not only the expense do you have to take into consideration, but it's also shipped in so that increases the environmental footprint that's left. And, And the natural resources now are being consumed by industries, especially commercial fishing, commercial lodges, and this is hard for me to look at because my dad was a commercial fisherman. And he did it all his life, but he fought on the side of the commercial aspect of fishing rather than from the Native perspective. So this is hard for me to look at, and I feel like sometimes I'm kind of, not supportive of my father. But, it is something that needs to be looked at because the people in the rural areas especially count on fishing and hunting for their life and whaling for their livelihood, and they're losing that. And not only are they losing their food, but also a lot of their arts and crafts, their basket weaving, the things that they produce, not only baskets, but arts and crafts, and the materials, the exotic materials they use, they're not able to gather that anymore, especially like in Southeast Alaska, the cedar roots. All of this is being lost because of urbanization. So, and that's how they make their money, is, a lot of the women, especially up north, way up north, are moving from their rural homes to, let's say, Anchorage, because they can sell them there. There's a market for them there. But they're not able to get what they need to be doing this, so that affects their economy and how they're able to make a living. Also, because there's not a lot of industry and there's not a lot of jobs in rural area Alaska. So, and even before I started this project, I thought of subsistence as, eking out a very marginal way of life, but it's not. It's who we are as a Native people, and it's not. I don't believe it's just Alaskans strictly. I think this goes for most tribes. That what we get is from the land, and when that's going away because of urbanization or tar sands, whatever they're doing, it's destroying our environment, and we're losing who we are due to this, what do they call it, economic development. And a lot of us take for granted when we need something in a grocery or we can just, get in our cars and go to Safeway or whatever. But a lot of the villages in Alaska, you can't do that. And in the city where my dad grew up, there was a little town, Craig, a loaf of bread, white bread is $5.35 for a loaf of bread, and the same for a gallon of milk. So things we take for granted, like just being able to go out and get an ingredient, you cannot do that in rural areas in Alaska. And I have a quote here. It was, so when our Native people participate in subsistence, it's reaffirming who we are. And I find that very true. And this is from the Alaska Federation of Natives. Today, the only remaining protection of our villages, quarantine-based and traditional way of life is federal law. Without it, most villages cannot feed themselves and will slowly disappear throughout migration. The cost of the resulting economic collapse and social dislocation would fall on every Alaskan, native or non-native, urban or rural. Whether we recognize it or not, every resident of our state has a vested interest in the survival of the villages through their own productive labor rather than through greater welfare dependency. And I found this interesting, and I just realized this as I was going back over my case that, and reading Al Zion's book, A Lawyer in Indian Country, that the same is happening in Alaska, that natives that go out and fish when they're not supposed to or where they're not supposed to are being treated as criminals, just like what happened here during the fishing wars in Washington. And there are natives that live in urban communities that also hunt and fish. And it's just part of, it's how you grow up, that's how they grew up. Because a lot of people, they didn't have big cities back, it's evolved. And even what I say is a big city really isn't a big city in Alaska. But they're still hunters and fishers. Like and that was one of the problems when they came up with, where they tried to write an act to protect these rights, they did a rural preference. And urban natives objected to it, and also non-natives objected to it because they didn't feel it should be strictly rural. And the state of Alaska did not want to put in the verbiage of natives because they didn't want this to go through. They did not want to do the preference for natives because that would take away from the commercial aspect where the money comes from. And if you look at found some statistics, 98% of the harvest of natural resources is commercial. And for subsistence, the percentage is 1.1% of the harvest of any year. This was 2012. So the amount they're asking for to protect for themselves is not huge. It's not huge at all. And the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which they don't have reservations in Alaska. What they did is the United States government bought the land and broke it up for the Alaska Natives into 13 regional corporations and paid them money and gave them so much land. But the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, what it did, it forever extinguished hunting and fishing rights for the Alaska people, for the natives. So it got rid of any hope that it would protect our subsistence rights in Alaska. And then that was put into effect, I believe it was 1971. And in 1980, there came the Alaska Native Interest Land Conservative Act, and that was ratified in 1980. And that is where the rural preference came into and was objected to, and it was actually found in violation of the state of Alaska's constitution, so it had to be thrown out. And that's kind of where it sits today. There's no protection, there's no laws, there's nothing, giving natives a right to protect their natural environment so that they are allowed to continue to exist and not lose, everything that was theirs. So it's really still at a stalemate, nothing's moving forward, and the stalemate is on the shoulders They refuse to go against the interests of sport, commercial, and other entities who are invested in fish and game because they don't want to lose that money that's coming into the state because of these industries. So, let's see. And I really enjoyed reading some of the quotes and statements from natives who practice just subsistence. They don't understand sport fishing, hunting. And this is from Jimmy Baluta. He's a resident of Mount Dalton. And he says that what they do for recreation is his work. It bothers him to see sportsmen killing caribou for trophies and catch and release fishing, which he said is disrespectful. It's plain food. And I didn't know this either. I thought catch and release was a great thing, but a lot of people don't know how to do it, so the fish end up dying anyway because they're not released correctly. So it's a huge issue, and it's an ongoing issue, and I don't see any, at this point from my research, an end in sight anytime soon. And so in summarizing this, I said the debate over subsistence rights still rages on. There are disputes over the meaning of subsistence, how and who should manage subsistence programs, whether federal and state governments can agree on all or most points, and which Alaska state residents will meet the criteria set up for subsistence rights. Valid points are made to support all sides of the argument. And I really would love to talk to Mr. Zions about this to see what his perspective would be on how to go about moving this forward so that, the Alaska natives can not worry about this and be guaranteed a continuing of their way of life, because that's what it is. It's a way of life. It's who we are and have been for thousands of years. And we've lost so much, so it would be great to have some kind of guarantee that we will be able to keep our culture, our traditions, and move forward as Native people. Thank you.
Okay, so questions for Susan?
Oh, sorry. Do you want to go ahead? Okay. I heard you say earlier that your father was a commercial fisherman.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, if you feel comfortable, could you give us more of an idea of what your conflict was? Because I know, from a Native American standpoint, and thinking about subsistence is a very different kind of fishing than a commercial fisherman would do.
My father was born in Alaska, and he was sent to boarding school in Sitka, Alaska. And he left Craig when he was a very young man, went into the Navy, and never wanted to go back to Alaska. So throughout this process, what I see has happened to him, because when the boat decision was coming down, he was really upset because that was going to affect his fishing, and he didn't understand it from the other point because he was raised at a boarding school, so he was not allowed to be Native. He wasn't allowed to be who he was born to be. So he came from a different perspective with it, and for me, he made a good living, and he made it a good life for us. So for me to sit there and question maybe the way he looked at things and speaking against us a little bit was really hard for me.
I can imagine.
My question was just whether or not there was any attempt to kind of break off that provision that was written in there, the priority provision under Title 8. Yeah. If they took that kind of out of the general lands and that general bill or whatever, the Conservation Act, and look at it just as an independent provision, if they would be able to make any more progress on that between the state and federal government.
That I'm not sure about. I know that they did not want to, like I said, the commercial people don't want to keep the rural in there, so it keeps it stalemate. That's why they don't too. So then the state can't make a decision and it's out of compliance with the state and the federal government takes it. So now it's kind of like they're both regulated.
But something like this, I guess, argue from the idea of basic human right. I mean, the world always jumps to saving the habitat of the spotted owl, the waters where certain fish are, the pandas, the eagle, protecting all these animals. Yet the way of life is surrounded for these communities is based on this fishing practice and all these rights. To really put it as animals are being treated better than the people in this place being one of your biggest arguments. Is that something that's been used as, I guess, a defense to kind of push it further to make the feds do right by the Alaskan Natives?
Not that I've seen. What's going on now. Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do now is work the questions. And so I have table 1 here. So Charlotte's table doing question 1. And this
Okay, I've been tasked with the question, and the question is, does this debate about protecting Alaska Native subsistence rights boil down to priorities? Discuss the various stakeholder positions.
I had talked about how the Eloise Cobell case had boiled down to the lawyers at the end got $90 million and she only got $2 million. And it's all about money. The priorities, the lawyers, they don't care unless, you know, they're all natural, like, oh yes, I am a lawyer because I do want to fight for the rights, but there's not many. And if you ask the lawyers, they'll say the same thing, you know. But the list was, it was priority is money. Pleasing others and not the first people, the landholders. Is there a Native voice, and is there a lot? Is there a lot of fight for the Native voice? Scattered villages, there's only 13 corporations, and there's not very many successful corporations. And depleting sources, and they are fighting for it, but they can't come to an agreement, so it automatically just all came to the conclusion that it's just about the money, you know, and that's the main priority, so.
The question that we had to answer was that do subsistence rights of the Alaskan Natives outweigh the needs of sport and commercial harvest? And then it said explain. And we said yes, obviously. As commercial fishing, which is 98%, is unsustainable for the local ecology, ecosystem, which affects the local subsistence-based fishing abilities, and then also removes itself from the local economy. So a lot of times, commercial fishing or agriculture will remove the products that they have and sell it out of state. So it's actually making the local economies unable to really work amongst themselves. So yeah.
In the state of Alaska, Alaska Natives can gain and protect subsistence rights while continuing to profit from commercial fisheries. How can this be accomplished to be specific? And the answer is yes, commercial fishing is responsible for 98.2% of taking of natural resources from Alaskan waters. Fish runs decline due to overfishing by commercial fisheries, and subsistence communities have priority suggestion. It includes closing out hunting and fishing, sportsmen, and limiting commercial fisheries with strict regulations.
Yes, and we said yes as well to, obviously, like she said. And because it's their way of living, and their way, how they feed their family, and creating a tradition in their culture. And commercial and sports harvest is just for fun and making money, so I just feel like. So yes.
Can the state of Alaska help Alaskan natives to gain and protect subsistence rights while continuing to profit for commercial fisheries? How can this be accomplished with these specific? We kind of talked about it for a while, and we were wondering if there could be a smaller quota for a certain amount of time for commercial fishermen and allow the natives to come in for a larger percent of the time before the fishing really hits, before winter. And so like giving them that window each time before the season starts to get what they need for winter. And then, let's see. We're gonna have to do a survey on each family to see how much fish and natural foods they really do eat in their homes and how much they need to gather, so we can find out really what's the need, because not too many people are eating traditional foods these days, so it might not be as big as they thought it was. And then we were talking about having the commercial fishermen, which I'm really specifically talking about cowboys, is giving a percentage, maybe like 10% of their fish, is what they're like 90-some odd percent. So like maybe giving 10% of their fish to elders specifically, so that they get their fish knocked out right away during each fishing season. And that was brought into the gathering grounds also, that was what we were talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks ready up here?
Is it possible for thousands of years of tradition to match with the cultures of society of 2015? Explain and give several examples. Well, we said no, because we were taught only to take what was needed, not grab more. Then, and what she had, as life is the, I'm sorry. Yes, this. Need some help, man.
What we're discussing is, as a culture, from the beginning, when we go out and we go fish, take what we need for the family, bring it home. But now commercial fishermen are taking more than they need, just for profit, not for culture. And so it's not intertwining very well. In fact, they're going against each other. The examples from the paper where that people go up there and hunt caribou, but only for their antlers. We go and catch and release the fish in a bad way. And as he said, claiming the food is disrespectful to our beliefs and culture that are slowly starting to fade away as modern society takes over. When you think about the youth within our villages, they're on their phones, the PS3s, Xbox. I'm guilty of that. I'm part of the youth, but I try to maintain that from a cultural aspect. Go out and go fishing, go out and go hunting. But as we move further on, and as technology starts to advance, we're starting to lose our culture as a whole. We don't smoke fish anymore. There's fishermen that catch fish out of the water just for their eggs or just for some aspect that they can make money off of. And throw the fish aside and don't eat it. And so that's why we think that our cultures cannot intertwine with society today. Thank you.
how it applies to rural Alaskans and Alaskan Natives. There's always a claim of people who have thousands of years of history over anything else. Now you have to try to make sure that's defined clearly for the feds and the state. And along with everything else that happens in society today, you need a media blitz for it. A lot like Brando did with the fish wars, you need somebody to come and work for you, a lobbyist who will be on your side. And personally, I think something bad has to happen. You know, you have the attention that's paid to Ferguson for all the negative things that are happening. You have the attention that are given at Lakota 54, or 57 rather. And that's something that has to happen. Once media shines its light on it and you find all the people that are huge advocates down here in the lower 48 to lend their hand, to go and be a part of it, then you start seeing changes happen. You have lawyers who are willing to work pro bono just to make sure that they can do something. The same way that Al Zions did at the beginning, just working smaller for a larger cause. The more attention you get, the more educated people are willing to do whatever they can to make sure that they can claim the victory with you.
Well, I guess the one thing is with the commercial fishing, when my dad first started fishing when I was back in the 60s, when I used to go to Alaska with him, they could fish from sunup to sundown. Now they do have specific times and hours they can do it. It's well reduced, but there's a lot of fishermen. Most of those fishermen are not natives. You know, some of them are native run fishing boats, but a lot of them are just, you know, Caucasians. So they're not, you know, I love the idea of giving the elders some of the fish, but that's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. So.
You do it in evening.
What?
When they do it in evening.
I'm Steve today.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. Hi. We have Charles Wilkinson coming. He's confirmed as one of our speakers. I believe Cindy's still working on Lionel Duke. So we haven't confirmed with her, but we're trying to get a hold of her. And we have a special announcement. We did receive $5,000 from the Muckleshoot Charitable Fund. So we're really happy that that came in. We can use those funds. I'd like to thank Cindy and Teresa for putting that together and getting it turned in for us so we can keep everything moving and needed.
Thank you, Ben. Steve, sorry.
Okay, and every year about this time I start getting the sort of teary-eyed because it's like you're happy that people are graduating and then you're sad that they're leaving, right? And you know, working this many years in the program, I think that there's nothing finer than our students and their work. And I think that sometimes, you know, we have some days that have a little rough waters in them, but over the long term, we're all moving forward. And even the days where there's something difficult, it's time to celebrate. And this place and this program is very special to me. And I hope that some of you will go on and you know, you'll get your master's degree, you'll be out there doing many different things, but to come back and give back to the program where you got your bachelor's degree is truly rewarding work, and it keeps me motivated at all times, and I'm always have you on my mind in a big way, in a way you'll never really know, because your work is my work, and we're all in this together, doing our work together. Which leads me to the topic of Miss Amber, if you want to step up here. And Amber, it seems like just yesterday when she came into our program, and now she's graduating. Yay! Yeah. And I just am amazed at her stellar performance and the way that she gives it all on every single assignment. And the professionalism that she lends to her work is absolutely incredible. And she is doing work far beyond the undergraduate level, and I think far beyond the work that most people would do when they're just so young and have such young children. And her work is just truly amazing. And for me, it's she's gone from being a student at a site that I didn't have a whole lot of contact with to working with her all year long and getting to see the body of work that she's done both before I got to know her and during this past year. And she's an amazing testimony, a true leader as we watch her in the making, because she is all about helping her community and all about language preservation and cultural preservation. So I would like to present Ms. Amber. And her topic is, should museums repatriate all Native American artifacts back to tribes? And her case is one of them that Barbara is also working with to have it put up onto the website as an actual case.
Hatzlachel Tuagulapu, Amber Hayward Zita, Puel Bachchuk, to all Chad Buckleshoot, Chalo. Good day to you folks. My name is Amber Hayward. I'm a Puyallup tribal member and I attend the Muckleshoot Tribal College. As Cindy said, my paper was on the return of artifacts to tribes. And just a little preface, I used to work in our historic preservation department for about 8 years, and this is where I got exposed to NAGPRA and repatriation, so this is kind of where my heart lies here with the return of actual artifacts. And I visited several museums all across the United States, including the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I was able to see a lot of our artifacts that are stored all the way over there in Washington, D.C., where we don't have access to them, and they will not ever get repatriated back to us under this current law. So to start off, how did we even get here? How did our items get into museums and different institutes around the United States and actually across the world for that matter? Originally, very wealthy and prestigious non-natives went around the entire world collecting artifacts from exotic lands and different people all across the world. They included natural items, plant fibers, different things from nature, to man-made products from these different exotic people, and also human remains. These people would store these items, and they were called cabinets of curiosities, in their own homes that they would show to different people who came to their houses for parties. It was just like a very wealthy, it was a status. So they collected these, and this is actually a picture of a cabinet. Because there were so many of those cabinets of curiosities, the Smithsonian decided to open up an institute in 1856 in Washington, D.C. to house all of those artifacts. At the time, the late 1800s, social scientists believed that Native American cultures would soon vanish and die away, so they believed that it was their act to go collect all of the artifacts that we had in our tribes, including Native American human remains, grave goods, and our artifacts. Okay. So in 1870, the Smithsonian Secretary, Joseph Henry, he wrote to the Board of Indian Commissioners and stating this quote here: "It was the duty of this country to collect and preserve all the relics possible of the race of men who have inhabited the American continent. In 1863, the Smithsonian actually sent out this circular here that's posted up here, pictured there, and that was sent out to different collectors across the United States. It was to inform them of collection tasks, to give them prescribed methods on how to collect these items, and actually a list of highly sought after items that they wanted for their museum. And on the top of that list included human crania that was needed to study the different stocks of the American race. So actually in this circular it said to collect human cranium for Native Americans. And clearly there was several different methods used to collect Native American artifacts and human remains, as you can see listed there. Probably number one would be confiscation from the U.S. government, which took ceremonial objects from Native Americans during the time of religious persecution. So there's an entire set of items and remains that came into the custody of the U.S. government. Coercion was a part of the collector's methods. They would pay people off or have people steal different items or talk to the elderly who didn't understand, and somehow they would get these items in their possession. Another huge one was grave looting. Clearly museums and institutes have items they should not have that clearly came from graves. So where else would you get those? You would actually go grave looting and robbing. And an unfortunate example comes from James Swan, who worked as a teacher at the U of A Industrial School in Washington State here in the late 1800s. He was a teacher at the school who became familiar with the Makah people in the community, and he used that in order to try to get them to collect things for him. The adults were very resistant, so he turned to his students and asked them to collect different things from their family and out in the environment. And even at that, the children were pretty resistant as well. So then he took to his own means, and he wrote a letter to the Smithsonian because he was one of these collectors that they solicited to bring items to the Smithsonian. He wrote in a letter to the Smithsonian stating that he believed the human remains that he gathered, this is what he was talking about, he believed that they were to be heads of chiefs or prominent men, as no slaves were ever buried in that place where he gathered them. So he clearly wrote that in his correspondence to the Smithsonian of how and where he got the human remains. Which brings us to 1990, the NAGPRA Act was passed, which is called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. This required museums and universities and institutes that were grant funded to do an inventory of all Native American artifacts and human remains, and they were to post those on an inventory and allow Native Americans to actually see that inventory so that they can post claims to the different items or human remains. The one below there is the National Museum of American Indian Act, which was founded 1 year before NAGPRA law. The NMAI Act only applies to the Smithsonian, which actually was the foundation of a lot of these collections, where a lot of these cabinets of curiosities went. They have 800,000 Native American artifacts in their collection. So they have their own act because they have so many, and the initial act did not include the return of artifacts. It only included return of human remains. So in 1996, they ended up adding the artifacts as well as human remains, and they're straight from their website. It states that inventory identified and considered for return if requested by a Native American community or an individual to be returned. So theirs isn't quite exact as the NAGPRA law. They require that tribes seek them out. They don't seek the tribes out to return these items, and then they'll consider it for return. So under NAGPRA law, tribes have to prove that the Native American remains or artifacts belong to their people, and they have to do this through cultural affiliation. In order to establish cultural affiliation, tribes have to prove this long list right here. They don't have to necessarily prove every single one. They have to prove some of them. And that stack of paper there literally represents like work that I had to do in our tribe's historic preservation department. I would pull files and files and files out to try to prove that, human remains all the way over, Washington DC or across the United States belong to our people. They don't know who we are. They don't know our lands like we do. So we had to literally pull out all these files and try to prove all of these things on this list here. To why those human remains or artifacts belong to our people. If a tribe is successful in proving some of these on the list here, the human remains are returned to the tribe. But if they are unsuccessful or there's not enough documentation on the remains or where they came from, those still stay in museum and institute's hands. So those are literally still sitting there because nobody can prove that those remains or artifacts belong to their tribe. So now I'm going to switch over to start talking about the classifications of artifacts. Human remains is one set of issues, and then artifacts is a whole other issue. So there's 4 different groups or classifications of artifacts that museums have. The first one is associated funerary objects, which is an item that was believed to have been placed with a Native American during burial or after burial. So it's a specific item that was placed with that person for a specific reason during their time of death or after. And that is also in possession of a federal agency or museum, so it has federal funds. The second one is unassociated funerary objects, which is exactly the same as the first one, however, it's not in possession of a grant or federal agency. Number 3 is sacred objects. Now those are items that are needed by a traditional Native American religious leader. And they have to prove that present day people still use that item to even get that back. So if you have an old document that says our religious leaders used this item hundreds of years ago, and then they say, well, do you use that item today? And you say, well, no, then you can't get it back. So even if you have documentation saying our people had this, if you can't prove that you use it today, it stays in their hands. The last one is cultural patrimony, which are objects that are believed to have ongoing historical and traditional cultural importance to the entire Native group, so not just to one person. That item would belong to the entire tribal community. And then these items here still, I went back to Washington, D.C., they had our baskets, they had our tools, they had weapons. None of those are able to return to our Puyallup people. And that happens all across the United States. So it's just incredible that, there's baskets, we have basket weavers today, they're not able to look at old baskets that are sitting in museums unless they go make an appointment to go look at those. And another really unfortunate quote came from Franz Boas, who was an ethnologist in the Northwest area. He visited many of the tribes here, and he quoted as saying he visited the Northwest area, went away to do more travels, came back 25 years later, and he was actually joking about the people and their potlatch speeches, and this is his quote here. He noted hearing the same potlatch speeches before his departure, while the ceremonial objects being referenced were no longer there. He stated, "It was remarkable how the people cling to the form, though the content is almost gone. The bowls are no longer here. They are in museums in New York and Berlin." Exclamation. So that's him having correspondence. So he's kind of laughing about, haha, we took all these items, and here they are 25 years later still talking about them in their ceremony, but they're all the way over in Europe. Haha. So it's just really unfortunate how you can see how hard it would be for Native American tribes to prove that they still use those items hundreds of years later when they were taken from them. And So clearly we have two different groups on the side of returning Native American artifacts back to tribes. The first group would be museum staff and other professionals. All of these people listed here were extremely opposed to the NAGPRA law passing. Clearly there's several reasons of why they did not want to return these items. Their reason was, the first one clearly would impact their jobs. They probably wouldn't have museums if there's the smaller ones. They could potentially shut down if their entire collection was Native American items. Their grant funding, they would lose their grant funding as well. So clearly those are probably the initial ones that they were very concerned about. The other reasons are scientific research, the study and the preservation of our human remains and our artifacts. Another reason is they wanted to hold on to them for future generations of new techniques became available to them as well. And then another reason is they believe that artifacts should not be returned to tribes. These tribes do not have museums or museum quality facilities to take care of these items. On the other hand, you have the Native American tribes and their supporters. Clearly in the 1980s, Native American groups were rallying together and they were able to get the NAGPRA law passed. Under the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, they were able to get that. There's clearly several reasons of why Native Americans want their human remains and artifacts back. Number one, many of the times they were wrongfully taken in the first place, and that's denying us our bond and our attachment to these different items that our people had. Another reason is the museum staff members are not even qualified to care for them in the way that we could care for them. So they could say the same thing about us. You don't have a museum, so you can't care for them. Okay, well you don't believe what we believe, so you can't care for them. You're not properly caring for them. So both sides could say the same thing. There's cultural protocols required in the handling of objects that museums have no idea about or are clear across the United States. And it's incredibly unfortunate. I, Kellogg tribal member, had to go to the Burke Museum to look at a hat that they found in the Tacoma area. It was an incredibly old hat. She had to go and visit there continuously to go observe the hat, to see how it was woven. She made an exact replica of the hat. But it's unfortunate that a tribal member has to do that to go visit. What if that hat was clear across the United States? You know, people don't have funding to go and get these items back or to visit these items. It's just very unfortunate. And then Native Americans also don't have the ability to say who comes to visit those items as well. That is in the control of the museum. Which brings me to my finale, and I believe you guys have questions. These are just a few of the questions that I put up here. Some ethical issues to consider. But that concludes my presentation. If anybody has questions.
That list that you showed us about what it takes, you know, to complete the files, okay. Is there a minimum of those things that are being asked before they return the artifacts, or can you prove like single or just one? You know what I mean?
It's a preponderance of evidence. So if you plead a good case based off of geography, let's say, and you prove it very well, you can be considered. It just depends on the museum. The museums usually have committees that decide if you have enough evidence. So it's not a clean slate across the board.
Okay, so they're just kind of making it harder possible for you. Okay, now what about like the biology of the remains that they have? What if there's kinship to somebody, or they, you know, I mean, if you prove that, or they're not going to actually be okay, and then.
Well, they still come up against human remains all the time. And when I was working in that department, if they found human remains in Puyallup at a construction site, let's say. So there is a coroner who decides if they're old enough to be Native American remains, so they check them out. Then they notify all the tribes who ask for notification for the Puyallup area, which is multiple tribes. And then what they do is they send a notification out and they say, okay, we found these human remains, who's going to put their name in for them, pretty much. So then I would have to go get a stack of different files, go through them. Okay, well, we had a village site, about a mile away from where you found those human remains. The skull is flattened on the head, and that's what our people did. If you had it was a sign of prestige. So I have to go pull that document off where we flattened our heads. We just have to sit there and just pull, and here's a repatriation that we received 10 years ago, 1 mile away from that area. So we clearly got those. So we have to list literally so much different, stuff in order to get the human remains back. And then sometimes you're fighting against other tribes as well to get their remains back, which is not something, who wants to fight against another tribe, on human remains. So that's kind of how it goes. You just pull different documents and try to prove. I mean, I only know from speaking from, the experience I have. Other tribes may have a lot more documentation or information, and some tribes have nothing to prove. So it's really unfortunate. And if you are a unrecognized tribe, you have less, to go on as well.
If something like that was to come forward, that you would have to go through and research all that, is there like a time frame like from day one to say 3 years from now? Is there a time frame that you have to follow?
With NAGPRA, there is a register that they post. So if there's human remains found or these different artifacts, they post them in this, it's like a big newspaper. It's like an inventory that you have to go and check on their website. So it's something you have to do. So, oh wow, there's human remains from Puyallup, or there's a religious artifact that, and then it does have a deadline on it. You need to have a response to us within 45 days. So you write a whole letter based off of the information you have and your interest, and then it goes on from there. It goes to their committees, and they decide, and if multiple tribes have put their name in for those remains or those items, then again it goes to kind of a battle, and then it's the NAGPRA committee that decides who gets the remains or artifacts.
So is that committee, do they have any Native American representation on this committee?
I believe they do. But I can't speak for all of them. Yeah, I believe they have to have those big museums. Yes.
So Amber, what happens if a tribe is able to get something repatriated back to them and they don't have a museum? Where can they store it? Or does the museum or whoever has that item, that artifact, the bones, do they have to then dictate to them if they can't give it back if they don't have a museum?
No, once the NAGPRA process has been gone through and the committee decides, they have to return those items to the tribe.
So it doesn't matter if they have a museum as well?
Nope. So the human remains normally are buried. They are buried immediately. They're properly cared for on the way there. Usually tribal members physically go get them. Sometimes they ask, can we mail them to you? So no, we can get our ancestors. So usually they're immediately buried right after that. However, our tribe has never been successful on repatriating any items back. I do believe some of the Alaskan tribes are pretty successful, and a lot of the tribes down south, like New Mexico, down in that area, they are a little more successful in repatriating actual items and artifacts back. But they can't dictate what we do with them after.
What, I know some of them, even some of the Alaskan tribes who were like really close to getting us repatriated, they actually fought them because they didn't like that they were denied their own artifact. So they outright fought them.
And people know that too, and it's really charge so much money for items that are clearly belong to that tribe. It's very unfortunate.
But I just want to mention, I don't know if this is something that is done, but one, I'd like to repeat reading or give it back. If somebody from that tribe proves their family lineage has agreed, does the tribe give that artifact back to that family, or do they determine to keep it to themselves?
And that's actually part of learning. All right, so I believe it was under the cultural patrimony, is if you can prove an individual. I had a lady from the Quinault tribe come to us and she asked if our department could store all these artifacts for her because she thought her kids would sell them off or pawn to a pawn shop, and she had this beautiful Italian breastplate. And she had a picture of her great grandma wearing that exact breastplate in like the 1800s. She had a whole story about it. You know what I mean? So some people by chance actually do have that documentation. But under these different classifications here, if it doesn't fall under this, it doesn't matter. Flat out doesn't matter. You have to prove it again. You use it today in some sort of ceremony. That's a sacred. You have to follow their guidelines. Or it will not.
Well, I mean, but once it was a tribe has it, maybe you're answering the question I'm hearing from, but once a tribe has it, let's say my tribe, regardless of basket from Washington D.C. is brought back, and I am able to prove that the style of weaving was something that was directly connected to my family, that it was definitely a descendant of my people that made it. Would it be offered, the tribe offered to me, being a part of the family, and I'm sure it goes back to the tribe saying you hold it, would it be offered to me as my possession?
That would be dependent on the tribe itself. Again, I don't have any experience in that area because we've never received any items back for our people. It would definitely be tribe specific. Some tribes have museums, some don't. Some families donate their baskets and their different artifacts that they've been able to hold on to through the years and, donate them to the tribal museum, but it's just going to be a case by case for the tribe.
Well, I would assume that we would have to go out, and I don't think many people want to look at that, but in that sense, I didn't know the tribe would be saying no, it's off to now. You have kind of the same way that museums can go.
Yeah, I don't know that answer.
So, I have a twofold question. In your opinion, do you feel that these criteria are too stringent? And is there a way to challenge it and get those criteria changed?
Under the NAGPRA Act of 1990, that's it. That's it. Unless, the natives get together and rally together to get it reformed. That's it. And as a lot of times these museums do end up creating good relationships with tribes because they work with them so often. Let's say you're a really good friend with the museum curator in Seattle, and they really love your tribe and they really love you. They still can't hand over, items. So it's really an unfortunate.
Well, even if they're budgeted,
If you have to go through the process, flat out have to. It's really unfortunate. Sometimes you'll get calls from homeowners who are digging around in their yard, and they're like, "Oh, we're just down the street from your tribe, and we found these, trade beads, about 3 feet down. Here, we'll give them to your tribe." They don't fall under NAGPRA because they're just an individual, and you get that sometimes. Sometimes people will hand over items or artifacts or arrowheads that they found in their yard. They'll turn them over and call the tribe. Some people do the same thing and try to sell them to us for a ridiculous amount of money. So it's
usually hear the intentions and that's just the state that did it. And so that's the way they do it.
Yep, and that exact example that you gave, now if there are people out on our reservations or in our areas that we originally inhabited, they have to notify the tribe. So for example, if the tribe's working on an I-5 project, they have to notify your tribe. So our archaeologist goes out to those sites and he monitors, because some tribes don't have archaeologists. They don't have monitors, for that exact, and then you can stand there and say, don't do that, you don't touch it, that's ours, and then they do end up giving those right directly to the tribe.
They did somebody, have somebody up the line, they did see that, but the state said, well, before we do this, we have to do this before we get back to you. They ended up really.
Yes, it's very unfortunate. And then if there's times where our tribe even have the facility to store any, there's some really large things, some very small things, so we actually did ask the Burke Museum, can you store those items for us? And I was like, well, they've been storing those for a long time, I need to go see if those are actually